For decades, the standard retirement plan in New Zealand has been so simple. You buy a house, you pay off the mortgage, you work hard, you hit 65, then you get NZ Super, and that's it. And the truth is, if you're under 50, the chances of retiring exactly like your parents did, they are getting slimmer and slimmer every year. I'm an economist and write for the New Zealand Herald. Andrew's a financial advisor and writes for Stuff, and together we work with our financial advisors to help people prepare for retirement. And recently we've both started seeing something seriously worrying. So in this video, you're going to learn why super is not the safety net that many people think it is, and what you need to be thinking about now while there's still time to plan. This is the Property Academy podcast.
The thing that people need to understand is that NZ Super does not work the way that a lot of people think.
Yeah, the way people tend to think that it works, and to be fair, back when I was young, this is how I thought it worked as well. You think that you pay your tax, that goes into a pot somewhere, that pot gets invested, and then when I get to retirement, I get paid from that pot with the money that I've put in there, right? So there's always going to be money in there because I've paid taxes all my life, and so therefore I'm entitled to have that money back as part of my superannuation.
I suppose it's probably because of the NZ Super Fund that you hear about this. You're like, oh, well, that must be where all of the money goes, right?
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah, our system is a pay-as-you-go system. So the way it works is the people that are in retirement at the moment are being paid from the taxes that you and I pay and a couple of other people pay. And that money goes straight to them via the government, and that's how they're funded. And then when we get to retirement, the young'uns pay our retirement.
And at the moment, there are about 4 people working per retiree. Now, keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that number. But when we talk about the fact that a lot of New Zealanders think that we're all putting our money in and then we get it back later on, in fact, 41% of people, according to a study in 2019, 41% of people, about 2 in 5 Kiwis, think that that's how our system works, but it's not. It actually is that pay-as-you-go system.
Yeah, and if you think like, okay, if we liken it, whenever we think of retirement, you do think about a fund like our Kiwisaver funds, right? Our Kiwisavers are our personal retirement fund, and that goes into a pot. That absolutely does. So I guess it's just natural to kind of think, oh, it probably works the same way, but it absolutely does not.
And sometimes I like to scare myself, which is quite funny because I actually hate horror movies. I'm too
like
jumpy.
A horror movie?
Nah, too jumpy for that. I'll never come to your house and watch a horror movie. We're hiding under the blankets.
Oh, yeah, that old excuse.
Block it.
I'm scared.
You can't say that on a YouTube and the podcast. But I do sometimes scare myself about New Zealand, about New Zealand's future, because if you think about it, at the moment, you might always think there are going to be enough young workers to pay for our retirement. But if I was to ask you, how many kids does the average Kiwi couple have? What would you say?
2.2, isn't that the number?
No.
Not 2.2?
No, that would actually be okay. If we were all having that many kids, life would be okay. We wouldn't have to worry about NZ Super too much because I think the replacement rate is 2.1 kids. So if a couple is 2.1 kids, all happy, we've got two adults having kids now, they're going to have 2 adults in the future. The issue is that we're having 1.6 children, which means that both mum and dad want their pension, which is two sets of NZ Super.
But they haven't had enough kids.
But they haven't had enough kids to create the taxpayers to pay for that.
Maybe you should only get the super if you've had enough kids.
But that'd be a good incentive. That'd be, I'll have 6. All good.
Get to work.
Give me that super. I'm here for it. But the other issue is that not only are we not having enough children, but then NZ Super is becoming more expensive because the oldies are living longer, right?
Bugger them.
Well, I mean, that's a very good thing, but it means that if we keep the retirement age at 65, then grandma and grandpa are spending maybe 25, 27, maybe even 30 years in retirement getting NZ Super for that long compared to maybe only a decade or 15 years, which it might have been in the past. So each retiree is getting more expensive and we don't have enough taxpayers, or we're not creating enough taxpayers through the process of breeding in order to pay for it as well. And then you've got to ask yourself, well, how do we keep grandma and grandpa old? How do we keep them alive? Well, it's through. Why are you laughing at that? I know. It's so awkward to talk about, eh?
So awkward.
What, me? Just naturally.
Yeah, just you in general. How do we keep Grandma and Granddad alive? Got you. Okay, I'm on the page
Healthcare is
now.
the answer.
Okay.
Healthcare. That's getting more expensive, and you've got to spend more and more on healthcare to keep them alive so they can keep getting their NZ Super. And so when I said to you before that there are currently 4 workers per retiree, in the future, by 2040, that ratio is expected to be 2 workers per retiree.
So hang on. 2040 isn't that far away, first of all. Like it sounds,
15 years.
Yeah, no, I can do the maths, thank you. It sounds like a really high number, but it's only 15 years away, right? Okay, so in 15 years, the 4 people that are currently paying for someone's super, they're probably still in the workforce potentially. And now all of a sudden, okay, there's some more people moved into the retirement age. Now there's only 2. So let's say it's, for ease of numbers, $500 a week per person in super. It's not, but let's just say it was about that, right? That each of those people is paying $125, right, from their tax. Okay, now that number's halved. Now there's only $250. So then the way I always think about this is, okay, what are we going to do? Do we just give the person in retirement half? Okay, so we cut their superannuation in half because that's all we can afford now. Or do we just give it to half the people? And so therefore now, okay, well, if you've got money already, well, you don't need the super. So you're going to have to spend that first because we can't afford to give it to everyone. I think that's actually quite realistic.
Well, that's why we're seeing headlines like, will NZ Super be means tested? I saw one that was like, actually, lots of people, that News Talk ZB talked about, do we need to means test NZ Super? Nicola Willis is saying, actually, at the next election, we are going to campaign on raising the retirement age to 67. And it's important to say that because of the baby boom, all of those babies that were being had 60 years ago, 70 years ago, we're not the only country facing this issue. So Australia has just put up their retirement age to 67. They're also thinking about whether it goes up to the age of 70, but at the moment moving to 67. Denmark, their age of eligibility is currently 67. They're raising it to 68 by 2030. By law, they've already introduced this law. They're going to raise the super age to 70 by 2040. That's when the superannuation really starts to become unaffordable. That means you've got 69-year-olds who would still technically be working. France, there were big riots about this. There were big protests about this. They increased the retirement age from 62 to 64. In the US, they're saying that their social security fund could run dry if they don't change something in the next 10 years. They're looking to increase the retirement age to 67. For those born 1960 or later, which is anybody who's like 65 or older at the moment. And China, after not changing anything for years and years, they're increasing the age from 50 to 55 for women who work blue-collar jobs. Interestingly, they split it out for people working white-collar jobs. So they're looking to increase it from 55 to 58 for women working white-collar jobs.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So, like, there is a very clear trend going on in the world where there are a lot of countries increasing it. And it might not be politically popular, but at some point, politicians say, actually, we need to get our A into G and something's got to change because it's not sustainable.
It's financially necessary. And I kind of think with the changes that are coming in with Kiwisaver contributions being higher, or the compulsory contribution from an employer being higher moving forward, I kind of think that's a sign of change to come, because there is going to need to be more of a reliance on you taking care of your own retirement rather than waiting rather than having a reliance on people working to fund it.
Well, hold that thought on Kiwisaver because I've got some interesting numbers for you. But the other thing that's important to mention is a lot of people might think, but NZ Super has always been 65. That's always been the age of eligibility as long as I can remember. But actually, it has changed in the past.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, because for most of you might absolutely be right in saying that in your life, or at least in the life that you can remember. So in the early 90s, the age did change, and it was a big change. It went from 60 to 65 for the age of eligibility. Like, that's a big jump. We're only talking about a proposed change now by National of a couple more years, going from 65 to 67. And I think that is the inevitable first step in terms of the overall revamp of superannuation as we know it. And look, this is going to affect people who are our age, actually, Ed and I, we're not going to get the superannuation in its current format. We might get something. I very much doubt it, personally.
Well, that was interesting when we started looking at those numbers that, well, who would this impact? I was like, oh, I mean, I knew it would impact me because I'm 8 years younger than you. But then I was like, well, surely it won't impact Andrew. Actually,
Calm down.
yes, you're 41.
Yeah.
And this would impact you. So, like, if this policy gets put in place, I think there's a decent chance that this NZ Super does go up. Imagine retiring at 67 or not being able to get either your Kiwisaver or super until 67. And the reason I say Kiwisaver, I see you want to jump in on that.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing that people don't kind of figure out. So Kiwisaver is tied to the age of eligibility. It's not just the age that you qualify for the weekly pension, but also you can access your Kiwisaver. So if you're doing your planning and you're saying, okay, I'm going to retire at 65, I don't want to work a day past 65, and you're our age, and your reliance is on the Kiwisaver, you're just going to put money into your Kiwisaver. When you get to 65, if the age has been pushed out to 67, or let's say it was being pushed out to 70, right? It was really extreme. Well, tough luck. You can't access that Kiwisaver till you're 70.
And that kind of brings us to the point where I want to say, well, what does NZ Super look like in 20 years' time in 2045? And yeah, I think that the retirement age likely will change. And actually, I think it needs to. I think that 67 is a bit timid. I think we've probably got to push it up a little bit more because NZ Super is one of our most expensive welfare policies. In fact, I believe it is our most expensive welfare policy in New Zealand. And I also think there will be some amount of means testing, and we see this in Australia. Now, the numbers are a bit convoluted in Australia, but basically, if you're worth 400 grand or more and you've got that liquid outside your family home, then actually you don't get Australian super until you've spent some of your money, which is basically the government saying, well, if you've got all this money, why are we paying you, mate?
100%. And I actually think that that's the right thing to do. I think too many people do need financial help from the government, that you can't be giving it to the people that don't need it. And me, as someone that pays a lot of tax, I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with that. One question I got, so what if people have got money tied up in investment properties in Australia, and yeah, they're generating an income from those properties, but it's not liquid?
Yeah, but if you've got wealth, that's wealth. So in Australia, if you got wealth, it's wealth.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, you don't remember. We did a whole podcast about Australian super
We've
once.
done 2,000 podcasts.
Oh, we did 20. I remember somebody messaged me. It's like, I never thought I'd know this much about the Australian superannuation scheme. But what's interesting is you might think of that threshold, and let's call it $400,000. I know that's not exactly it. It got me thinking, Australia's superannuation system, where people put aside 11 or 12% of their income, it is so, like, they are saving so much that a lot of Australians in the future will be above that means tested limit. And that got me thinking about New Zealand and how large our Kiwisavers could grow in the future, even if they're pretty modest now. So you might think that your Kiwisaver is quite small and like, oh yeah, well, even if there's means testing, surely, I'm not particularly rich, so I'm not going to fall under that. But actually, if you run the numbers, you might. And I know you've been looking at some for us.
Yeah, so I did the numbers on a 40-year-old. So say you're 40 at the moment and you're on an $80,000 a year income.
That's pretty normal.
Pretty normal,
that's pretty
right?
median for a 40-year-old.
And you might think, okay, well, I've only got $25,000 in my Kiwisaver today. So, just a modest amount.
That's less than average as well. Average Kiwisaver, even if you include like really young people, is like 30 grand.
Okay, so this person might not be feeling rich right now. Now, if you fast forward to age 67, because that's at least what I think it will be in the future, when you can access your Kiwisaver, if you've been in an aggressive fund and you've been diligently contributing, you've got about $900,000, right? You absolutely have enough money to disqualify you from getting the pension.
And that's in future dollars. Even if you adjust that back in today's dollars, that would be about 520 grand. And that's the thing about Kiwisaver. It's quite small in New Zealand at the moment, but fast forward 25, 27 years, and it's going to start to be quite meaningful. And so I do think there is a world where the government says, well, if you've got $500,000 of today's money in Kiwisaver, spend some of that before you come knocking on the government's door saying, pay up, love.
And I think, like, whenever I'm talking to particularly young people who are investing and thinking about their financial future, and certainly I take this approach myself, any assistance that I get from the government, both now and in the future, I see that as just something that I can't control and there's no way I'm going to rely on. Same as inheritance, right? Not that I expect to get that, but, again, I treat it as the same kind of bucket as that. It's a bonus, not something I should rely on.
Well, knowing your parents, you're not going to get an inheritance.
Yeah. And like, if you want to actually have control of your financial future, these are the things you need to start thinking about now, because that age will change. And if you don't want to be held to the date that the government sets arbitrarily in the future, well, then you need to take control of your financial future yourself.
Now, hey, I told you that we were going to talk about the New Zealand Super Fund because I was looking through our reviews, like podcast reviews. We got a 1-star review.
Oh.
A 1-star review. And
What now?
It hit my heart. And it was somebody who said, in a podcast there we talked about NZ superannuation, whether it was sustainable, you didn't even talk about the New Zealand Super Fund. And so I thought, I'll show you. I'm going to talk about the NZ Super Fund. You're going to know so much about the NZ Super Fund that you're going to know so much that you never thought you'd even know this much about the NZ Super Fund.
1-star reviews. Talked about the Super Fund. It was boring. Not relevant.
Talk too much about the NZ Super Fund. So you might think, okay, the government's been diligently saving in their piggy bank because the NZ Super Fund actually started 24 years ago, back in 2001. And the government that was back in the days where the government ran a surplus. They weren't in constant deficit like they are now. And so they started squirreling money away in the super fund. And the idea is that they'd put some money in and they're not going to start drawing down on this until like the early 2030s. And so there's quite a lot in there. There's about, I think it's 70-something billion in the NZ Super Fund at the moment. It's expected to grow to about 100 billion by the time we start drawing down on it.
Was the purpose of it for the fact that we had baby boomers?
Oh, yeah. So it was Helen Clark was the Prime Minister at the time. Michael Cullen was the Finance Minister. And they basically were like, we're going to have an issue because we've got all these baby boomers, so let's do something about that right now.
It's great forward thinking from a government.
I mean,
we don't see a lot of that nowadays.
Well, they brought in Kiwisaver as well. And I mean, you look at the Kiwisaver policy and you're like, that's genuinely quite a good policy.
Absolutely.
Like, this is how New Zealand now saves for their retirement primarily. Like 3 million New Zealanders have Kiwisaver. It's like a really good thing. But if we go forward to 2030, when we're going to start drawing down on it, NZ Super is only going to make up about 1/8 of the cost, right? So 12.5% of what NZ Super costs the country. It's not a lot, eh? That's why we didn't talk about it in that podcast. Upgraded to a 2-star review. But if we zoom forward to 2070, that's where they're actually predicting that our super fund, depending on how much the government squirrels away, could reach $1 trillion.
Okay, that sounds like a lot of money.
But even then, the forecast is that will only cover 20% of the cost of super. So let me put that in simple terms. We said before that we're going to go from 4 workers per retiree to 2 workers per retiree. If you chuck in the NZ Super Fund, we're kind of talking about 2.5 workers per retiree. So the NZ Super Fund works out to be about half a person in that equation.
So we're still 1.5 person too little.
And so something needs to change. Either you cut back on government spending or you increase taxes to be able to afford it, or we have a lot of immigration to bring in more taxpayers who are then going to be able to fund all of these retirees. So
but then all of those things have a consequence, a negative consequence potentially as well.
All of them have costs, right? Because even if you have immigration, you're like, great, here are all of these taxpayers that we didn't have to pay for their education. There are still costs on infrastructure, and then we'd be having a conversation about there are too many people compared to our infrastructure. We don't have enough houses. So none of these are cost-free. But thinking about the NZ Super Fund, just because I really want to upgrade that maybe now to a 3-star review that we're talking about it so much, our wealth fund, our NZ Super Fund, is quite small compared to some others. Norway's a little bit different because they've got all the oil money, but our NZ Super Fund currently is like worth 20% of our GDP. It's 20% of the size of our economy. Norway's is 400% of their economy.
How's it got so big?
They got the oil and gas money.
Wow.
Yeah, they got.
So they're set.
They got those petrodollars.
All right, I'm off to Norway.
You'd enjoy that. Compare that to Australia. We're actually a little bit better than Australia.
Wow.
Their sovereign wealth fund is only 10 to 15% of their GDP.
Is that because the compulsory contributions towards people's individual super funds are so much higher and they don't need it?
I expect that's probably the case, but you'll have to go call up Albo to check that one.
All right, I'll do that.
Now, one thing that I do think would be quite funny is now that we've shared all this info about the New Zealand Superannuation Fund, I think it'd be hilarious if everybody went to either Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts, leaving 5-star reviews with, wow, I learned so much about the NZ Super Fund. that such robust information about the NZ Super Fund added value to my day.
It will make Ed's work.
If you do that, in the next video we record, I will read out all of the 5-star reviews about the NZ Super Fund. Don't you dare leave a 1-star review saying too much info about the NZ Super Fund. That will rile me up.
Please don't, for the love of God, please.
Now, a lot of people will hear all of this and fall back on one idea. It's fine, I'll just invest in property. But that raises a much bigger question too. Can the average Kiwi even afford to buy a property in 2025? Because if that's your backup plan, you've got to make sure it's still on the table. So watch this next video where I break down what's really going on.